Devs gaining little, if anything, from AI coding assistance. I find this very hard to believe, so I'd love to dive deep into this to see what their study discovered. Okay, let's get into it. Code analysis firm sees no major benefits from AI dev tools when measuring key programming metrics. My first question is, who's being measured? Is it senior engineers or like junior engineers? What's a key programming metric? Is it like how many bugs are solved per day, or how many lines of codes are written, or how many tickets are closed? I think those would make sense, but let's find out more. Though other reports incremental gains from coding copilots emphasis on code review. Okay, coding assistants have been obviously early use case in generative AI gold rush, but promised productivity improvements are falling short of the mark. How is this even possible? Because I rarely write code nowadays. Like, I think a lot of the engineering I have to do is the engineering to come up with like really good natural language prompts. So Claude will write everything. I think when I used to use ChatGPT, I used to write a lot of the code because ChatGPT just hallucinates a lot and sometimes it just doesn't understand what I'm talking about. But with Claude Sonnet 3.5, I feel like if I'm very clear with what I want, it basically writes a lot of the code. Of course, I still have to do the engineering myself, the planning, the system architecture and stuff. But in regards to actually writing code, I usually just come up with really good prompts and just sit back and watch Claude just write most of it for me. So I'm very curious to see what's going on. What are other people doing that I'm not doing? Or maybe it's like a specific type of engineer that doesn't really need Claude. Because I think maybe if you're working at a company, you might need it less. Whereas because I'm basically like a indie hacker and I'm building things myself from scratch, maybe it's a lot easier to do some of the work that I'm having to do. So AI can help me with it. But let's see. Many developers say AI coding assistant make them more productive. That's true. But a recent study set forth to measure their output and found no significant gains. Use of GitHub Copilot also introduced 41% more bugs, according to the study from UpLevel. 41% more bugs. I'm trying to think if using Claude has increased the amount of bugs I find in my application. Not really, because the bugs I used to find are like simple mistakes that I would make that Claude would never make. Like, for example, doing a query parameter but forgetting to put the question mark in there, or forgetting to add a weight to a function that is async. Just like bugs like this, but 41% more bugs. That's insane. I can't imagine. The study measured pull request cycle times or time to merge code into repo. Oh, and the PR throughput, the number of pull requests merged. Okay, the first thing I think is if you're measuring time to merge code into repo, maybe because AI is writing some of this code, it just means that the amount of code that needs to be reviewed is more, meaning that it's going to take more time to review it. That could be something that could, I guess, like ruin the study. The number of pull requests merged. Again, merging more pull requests in doesn't exactly mean you're more productive. It might just mean you made a mistake and you're trying to correct it, or maybe you didn't do some things in the first pull request that you could have done. So, yeah, again, I'm very skeptical about all this. It found no significant improvement for developers using Copilot. UpLevel using data generated by its customers compared the output of about 800 developers using GitHub Copilot over a 3-month period to their outputs in a 3-month period before adoption. Okay. In addition to measuring productivity, the UpLevel study looked at factors in developer burnout, and it found that GitHub Copilot hasn't helped there either. I don't think AI will help with burnout though. In fact, if anything, I think it might actually increase burnout because you just feel like you can do so much with AI sometimes. So back in the days, maybe if I'm building a new application from scratch, I would say, oh, this will take me a month. But now I'm like, with Claude, I should be able to do this in one day, in 10 hours, because it's just going to write everything for me. And then obviously when it comes to actually coding it, you start realizing, oh, wait, this is actually going to take me longer than it should. So I think sometimes it actually increases the expectation I will have on myself, which might actually lead me to burn out more. The amount of working time spent outside of standard hours decreased for both the control group and the test group using the coding tool. Amount of working time spent outside of standard hours. Oh, they worked more, but it decreased more when developers weren't using Copilot. I don't know. I don't know. I don't trust any of this because I'll tell you what. Imagine you're coding really, really well. All the developers will understand this. When you're in flow, code is just being produced. There's no bugs. Everything is just being made. You're making progress. You tend to actually want to work longer than work shorter hours. So if Copilot is helping you and you're like building very quickly and you feel like you're making loads of progress, I feel like that could actually make you work more hours than less hours. Because usually when I quit is when I just have a bug, I can't figure it out. I feel like I couldn't find any Stack Overflow article talking about the bug, and I'm just like, you know what, I can't do this. Whereas with GPT and the AI, you feel like there's always a chance, and you could just like, if you just ask the right prompt, it's going to solve your problem. So again, skeptical. The study was driven by curiosity over claims of greater productivity gains as AI coding assistants become ubiquitous. It found that 97% of software engineers reported using coding assistants. I wonder what the remaining people are doing that are not using coding assistants. Maybe they're coding with like really hard languages that the assistants are not really good at. For example, I make videos on assembly, and I tell you what, GPT sucks at writing assembly code. I can't tell, it literally cannot do anything. Recently, I found more success with Claude, but GPT is just useless, basically. All it can do is like point me roughly in the right direction, but the syntax it writes are completely wrong. Nothing works. And I find it's the same with SQL because there's many versions of it. Sometimes I find it's like just bugs out and just hallucinates when it's giving me queries. Our hypothesis was that we thought the PR cycle time would decrease. So this PR cycle time seems like it's a big emphasis on this study. We thought that they would be able to write more code, and we actually thought that the defect rate might go down. But that doesn't make sense, because if you write more code, surely the cycle time will increase, because then now the code actually has to get reviewed. So I don't really understand. We actually thought that that defect rate might go down because you're using these Gen AI tools to help you review your code before you get it out there. True, I can see that you'd probably expect less bugs, but again, you have to compare how much code have you written compared to how many bugs have you found. So if in the past you only wrote a small amount of code, but it was not that much bugs, but now you're writing 10x more code, but it's only like 2x more bugs. Yeah, I guess that it depends. We have to do the vision there to understand what's actually going on. In addition, Uplevel isn't suggesting that organizations stop using code assistants. Well, that would be crazy to suggest. Imagine just telling a developer right now, stop using GPT, go back to scouring the web for Stack Overflow answers and reading documentations and so on. We heard that people are ending up being more reviewers for this code than in the past, and you might have some false faith that the code is doing what you expect it to. You just have to keep a close eye on what is being generated. Does it do things that you're expecting it to do? I think that's definitely true. When you just write one prompt and 100 lines of code is generated, basically your job is to review the code and make sure it works perfectly. What I usually do to fix this is that I like to have smaller files, just so that when Claude generates code, it doesn't have to generate too much. Like everything is broken up individually. So I'm usually telling it to generate code for like a single functionality. Like for example, like a service class that is responsible for creating and updating database records, something like that. It makes it easier for me to just quickly review it, have a quick understanding of what it's doing, rather than it's writing like hundreds and hundreds of lines of code. Where are people, blah, 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 developers haven't seen major productivity gains. I wonder if Cursor makes a difference, because I feel like GitHub Copilot versus using Cursor is a massive difference. Because I don't know, I just feel like everything is way faster than when I was using Copilot. Copilot feels kind of clunky. It feels like it's not really built in perfectly. Whereas with Cursor, I feel like everything is just built in. It's just working as I expect it to. And obviously being able to plug Claude in there is also amazing too. But I know you can do that on the Copilot, so it shouldn't really be a problem. Using LLMs to improve your productivity requires both the LLM to be competitive and an actual human in its abilities and the current user to know how to use the LLM more efficiently. He says the LLM does not process critical thinking, self-awareness, or the ability to think. There's a difference between writing a few lines of code and full-fledged software development. Coding is like writing a sentence, while development is like writing a novel, he suggests. Maybe that's what's happening. Maybe, I guess, low-level software engineers are using GPT to write a bunch of code, but they don't really know what it's doing, and they're just like submitting it for a pull request, which would make sense because I know I don't know, when I started coding when I was 9 years old, I can imagine if I had access to a tool like GPT, I'd probably use it to write a bunch of code that I didn't understand, as long as it seemed like it was working at the end. Because that's how I wrote code back then. I'll just write it, and as long as it seemed like it was doing the right thing, I'll be like, whoa, this works. So maybe if you don't have like a high level of grasp of like programming and and whatnot, maybe you're just more likely to say, I don't really know what this is doing. I don't think I'll be able to figure it out, but I trust it works. So yeah, why not? The coding assistant cloud is much different. Companies seen productivity gains using coding assistant like Claude. Oh, okay. The CTO. So there's more productivity gains using Claude. The CTO there. The company also uses. Oh, this is like for a specific company. Okay, I guess I get the point of this article. One thing I wanted to quickly do is just jump into Cursor to show exactly how I'm using it. So let me just open an application I'm working on. Let's open Viral Chiefs. You're going to find out more about this in the future, but this is my current project. I've been working on this for a few weeks. So this is like a router class or a router file that is basically responsible for all the API routes for projects. One thing I basically love to use this for is, for example, I'll show you one here. Get generated, let's just scroll down to get generated tweets. So the way I made this is, because this is very similar to get generated scripts, is I just used Cursor. So I have my commands, my shortcuts right now, Command I, because that's what I was using for Codium on VS Code. So I'll just say generate a route for generating tweets. And I'll just tag the service file that I'll be using just so that Claude has access to that when it's generating it. So it'll just be tweet.service. And then that should be good enough because I know it knows about how to generate other examples here, like the script. So it should be good enough to do that. And then, yeah, usually this works out perfectly fine for me. Let's see, it looks like, oh, I didn't delete I basically generated it wrong. Let me just delete this. I generated on the remove tweet. So if I just paste this here, for the most part, everything is good. It's just this should be .id. And yeah, this is basically perfect working code. Again, it didn't solve any big problems for me, but in the past I would have to write code like this myself and I would have to think about it and open this file on the side and make sure I'm using it properly. But basically most of this class was written that way. This whole tweet service, all I did is I had a script service right here. And I basically said, generate tweet service. And because I have this open, I don't actually have to reference it here because Claude uses everything that is open right now. Or should I say Cursor uses everything that's open. And I'll say for the tweet model because it's not open right now. And usually, again, this is something that would usually take me a while to copy and paste. And it's not solving any crazy problem for me. But this is pretty, I don't know, this has just saved me 15 minutes of work just like that. And keep in mind, I keep doing this throughout the application and it's actually generated the exact same thing again. So this is what I usually do when I'm building up my applications. But again, maybe it's different for me because I'm an indie hacker, but for other people that are working in bigger companies, maybe it's actually a lot harder to do this in a massive code base. So I don't know. I guess you guys can let me know in the comment what you think.